Howdy, I'm Jammer. So before we begin, as always, please don't forget that I have started a Patreon for this channel as well as the art that I do in my own private life. You can find a link in the description section below to my link tree where you'll find my Instagram and my website where you'll find my art. The Patreon is there and there is only a $1 tier. That's it. It's literally $1 a month because, hey, you like the channel, you like my art, and you've got a buck in your pocket that you don't mind parting with this month. Or maybe once every month, $12 a year. Any little bit and every little bit that you can give me, it really does help. So, please, 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 if you want to help the channel, check that out. Now, today we're going to be talking about something, well, I honestly didn't think I was going to do this one. And I say that quite a bit because honestly, again, as I kind of observe with life is I never really intend sometimes for some of these books to be here. Unlike some YouTubers I see who seem to have like an 8-point plan and phase 1, 2, and 3 of their productions. As always, I'm just some dude talking into a camera that most people only watch for about 5 minutes before they then go over and watch Lindsay Ellis. Again, I don't mind. Lindsay Ellis is awesome. Also, I just discovered ContraPoints, and they are awesome. Check them out. But, again, I read a fair number of comics, and sometimes I finish a book and I'm like, okay, that was fun to read, but I don't think I could really ever talk about it on the channel because the focus of this channel is not the history of comics or doing just a straight review of comics like, this book was good, 4 out of 5, something like that. It's really more trying to just talk about media, and one particular aspect of media, and how there are some artists who have done something really interesting with it. And today, we're going to be talking about a really, really, really interesting book, and in fact, a great book. And that book in question is Kirby Manga Mania. There's no joke, like, that's it. We're literally talking about Kirby Manga Mania by Hirokazu Hikawa. Yeah, seriously, there is no joke. We're really talking about a Kirby manga book. The reason for this is pretty simple. I was watching the new Comic Book Day video for my hometown shop, Ground Zero Comics, and Michael, my friend, pulled out this book, Kirby Manga Mania, and I went, Kirby, the Nintendo character Kirby that I spent a fair amount of my teenage years playing, and then getting the rest of my teenage years and early 20s getting my ass kicked because my best friend Kevin would always pick Kirby when we played Super Smash Bros. And I won maybe 4 games out of, the entire 10 years we were playing that game. Anyway, Kirby has his own comic book? Okay, sure. It was $10. $10 for not a lot of comics, but a fair number of comics about the character Kirby. I was intrigued, and as often happens, curiosity can sometimes lead to some really interesting moments, such as finishing the Kirby Manga Mania book and thinking to myself, wow, that was really stupid. I spent $10 on this, and then putting it off to the side and planning on giving it to my little sister because she loves Kirby and maybe she would want to try to read it because she honestly reads a lot more manga than I do. But then I was honestly sitting down and thinking about the ever-growing stack of books that I need to read and have read and eventually will need to reread for this channel. And I started thinking about Kirby again, and I was like, I don't do a lot of manga, and Kirby's pretty popular, and then also, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So I looked back over a couple of the stories and I realized in terms of this channel, this book is actually really great to talk about because even though narratively speaking, most of this is just fluff because most of these books are really designed more for a younger audience, visually speaking, there's still a lot of interesting tricks to this book in terms of the construction of comics. And so, yeah, believe it or not, today's video is going to be about Kirby Manga Mania. So, let's hop into just one story today, and let's sort of see, narratively speaking, why it's wacky and weird and ridiculous, but still manages to contribute something kind of interesting to the medium of comics overall. So let's get into it. So, Kirby Manga Mania Volume 1. And it's important to note that, again, I'll just have to remember the names of people that I'm doing because I don't, research or plan out these things. Hirokazu Hikawa actually wrote, over the course of his career, somewhere around 25 volumes of Kirby manga. And really, picture that. There are 25 volumes of Kirby comics. That's really saying something. Say whatever you will, you may have absolutely no respect for video games as just a media in and of itself. And if you are, I think you're a judgmental a-hole and I want you to go away. But even if you don't like comics or video games, you have to acknowledge the fact that somebody was willing and able to make 25 volumes of a comic series about Kirby. That's pretty interesting. Now, narratively speaking, what exactly is this collection about? Well, it's important to recognize that this book is a collection. I don't want to call it a bound trade, because it's not necessarily like that. This book, like a fair number of manga works, it tends to be very episodic, because this first volume is, for the most part, a collection of individual stories that would appear in other manga magazines, usually ones oriented towards children, or else usually Nintendo-affiliated products, because again, Kirby is a Nintendo character. That's where he got his start. He's a video game character. And Nintendo decided, hey, let's give him his own comic book. And this isn't anything new. As you can see to, my right, I'm sitting next to the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time manga, which is actually pretty good. And you may also remember, too, that I did a video entirely about a Super Nintendo series of comics. It was about Super Mario. Super Nintendo was the console system. Super Mario Bros. Had their own comics. So this is, once again, an exercise in kind of multimedia experience. The thing is, though, is that Kirby comics tend to be very different from Super Mario or Legend of Zelda in that the tone is very energetic, let's put it that way. To wit, let's look at just narratively one story of this collection. The story I'm going to look at is Chapter 3, Typhoon Kirby Makes Landfall in Dreamland. Now, right off the bat, hopefully you can kind of see, we're going to be dealing with a lot of bold, dramatic diagonal lines and big anime eye characters. If you've never read a manga before, get ready, because this is all the kind of cliches of manga on steroids. But please, 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 stay with me, because, again, I think it'll be worth it. The general premise is that King Dedede, a giant talking penguin who also carries a giant hammer and is ruler over, well, this land, decides, hey, I need to board up my castle. Why do I need to board up my castle? Well, because as you can see here, this little talking microphone character is predicting that there is a typhoon headed towards the kingdom. Okay, we have a setting, we have some characters, we have a conflict. And the conflict is, we've got to get ready for the typhoon, right? Spoiler alert, the typhoon isn't the thing they need to be worried about. Instead, the thing they need to be worried about is Kirby, because Kirby shows up and is like, hey guys, how's it going? And King Dedede is like, oh god, no, Kirby. And Kirby's like, well, I'm going to prepare for the typhoon. Heck, I'm going to grab my house, and I'm going to lift it up and take it back to the kingdom. But first things first, I'm going to crash through the walls of the kingdom. There, my house will be safe, but now my house won't be safe because there's a giant hole in the wall of the castle. You get the narrative tone, kind of like what I was saying. Again, it's very, very like bop 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 bop. It's a kid's book. It's meant to be energetic. Conflicts emerge and disappear just as quickly as they showed up, and basically the story just continues that way. Kirby tries to fix up the hole by plugging it up with King Dedede and various villagers of the actual castle. And then, after that, he begins to take up more preparations, like, say, locking up the front door with boards. And then when King Dedede's like, you can't do that, how are we supposed to get inside? Kirby's like, don't worry, we'll help you out there. And so he nails King Dedede's mouth open with wooden planks. And then he begins to realize, oh, no, wait, I can just suck things up. That'll help everybody out. That'll work, right? But then, no, it doesn't, because then the castle starts to crumble. So King Dedede's like, no, just go look out for the provisions, okay? And so the chef tells him, don't worry, we have all the provisions to last out the typhoon. And Kirby's like, really? Let me see. And as you can see, he sucks it all up. So much so that the chef's like, wait, that was all the food for everybody. And Kirby's like, really? Wow, that honestly wasn't a lot. And then we keep going, and Kirby still continues to further on. And he's like, let's see. Oh, yes, there's a helmet. He's like, I gotta test this helmet out. He's like, got a second? Why? I'm busy. Fire! Literally, fire. And King Dedede's like, ow, God, I'm on fire! Oh! And then, eventually, the typhoon gets closer and closer, and Kirby decides, hey, I'm going to build a doghouse out of bricks from the castle. That'll protect you. Oh, look at these boulders. That'll keep the castle in place when the typhoon eventually lands. And as you can see, it just keeps going and going and going in that route until eventually the typhoon decides, hey, you know what? We're going to completely miss the kingdom. Conflict averted, right? Well, you clearly have not been paying attention, because, as Kirby observes, uh-oh, I don't feel so good. Blah. And he's like, are you guys... you guys thought you'd take care of the kingdom during this typhoon? I should probably help you fix this place up. And King Dedede goes, no, you've done enough. Get out of here. Okay. That was fun. That was fun and ridiculous and absurd. And basically just about all of the, I believe, 10 or 11 stories in this book pretty much follow that same pattern. So, narratively speaking, if you're picking up Kirby Manga Mania expecting something like a cerebral, complex web of characters, and conflicts sort of interchanging and developing into something bigger and bigger and bigger, people originally hating each other and developing... No, this is not the book for you, okay? This is just not the book for you. This is cute fluff, narratively speaking. So how exactly am I supposed to find anything, formally interesting about this book? Well, if you were really paying attention to the actual artwork itself and paying attention to the panel layouts and just the way characters sort of interact with each other in terms of the actual story, there's some interesting dynamics at play here. Because again, looking at these pages, if you look at the panel layout, there's nothing in the way of kind of like a consistent layout. To wit, if I say pull out, well, actually Legend of Zelda isn't a good example, but say I take a page from the book I had out here originally, Ikaro. If you look here, this book is what most people would probably recognize as a pretty established and traditional comic. You have pages with usually square or rectangular layouts, but overall everything kind of falls within that larger rectangle. Characters don't veer out from the borders of the panel itself. This is a basic concept, but I always bring it up, but it's important because the panel is the action of comics. It's where all of the energy takes place. If we look here, again, the reader does not get a solid rectangle in which everything is taking place. You'll observe here that this very top panel completely swallows up the top half of the page, and even though one part of the panel ends, there's elements within these other panels that will bleed over, like this musical note, into other panels as well. Likewise, Kirby's face here, it kind of projects outwards. This bit of dialogue here will pop up and slightly go off the edge of the panel. And again, it's not one big overall rectangle. It's a series of, again, smaller rectangles that move from horizontal presentations to vertical presentations. So, again, the reader is constantly caught up, trying to sort of catch up to the layout of the panels. And it may not seem terribly important at first, but that can create a real effect. Whereas Ikaro tended to be, again, smooth transition from panel to panel, Kirby's are more chaotic. And again, that's because it's supposed to be. This is energetic and ridiculous and absurd. And so Hikawa is really trying to convey Kirby's youth and energy to the reader because the kids that are going to be reading this book are, well, children. They have youth and vigor and energy. They're not old people like me who are like, you damn kids, get off my lawn. I'm not there yet. They do need to get off my lawn, though. Let's be real. I work hard on it. Anyway. But, again, panel layouts are something I always bring up, but it's important because it can convey as much to the narrative tone of the work as the characters themselves. Now, along with that, something I bring attention to always, but it is important, is paying attention to lettering. You'll see, just by looking at this two-page spread, how many different types of lettering there are. This bam! Setting the place of Kirby knocking the wood and nailing it into place. Followed here by slip thud. Slip thud. What is that? That's King Dedede falling over. The anime character going is a pretty standard trope. It's almost a kind of, how you say, it's not necessarily a symbol, but it's a communication strategy that anybody who reads manga regularly or watches anime regularly will recognize. It conveys frustration or annoyance. It's the character going, I can't. I can't. Oh my god, I can't. And so in this way, it's following one of the traditional standards of manga, but then two, it's using this lettering method in order to really heighten the annoyance of King Dedede at discovering that Kirby's nailed this board shut, or nailed these boards over the door. Likewise here, look at this. Bang, bang. These are hard bang bangs, but they convey Kirby hammering the board into Dedede's mouth. So lettering, too, is also being used as a way to communicate energy and vitalism, and it's supposed to be kind of like, whoa, so much is happening at once, I can barely keep up. And if you're like me, who's like freaking 32 at this point and likes my comics to be, you know, not dead or dull, but at least kind of smooth and orderly, this book can be such a whirlwind and almost obnoxious at times. But again, it's because it's trying to convey something differently than is my usual aesthetic. Now, alongside that, I also need to talk about the way that characters are portrayed in the story. Because again, you'll see King Dedede and Kirby, they're very simplistic representations. I mean, Kirby himself, in terms of character design, it's a mouth. That's all Kirby ever really is. He's just a little pink puffball with two little nubs for feet. Sometimes he'll have kind of hands, and then you have his eyes in his mouth. It's almost just the iconic smiley face. So just about anybody can imprint themselves upon Kirby. That's one of the reasons why Kirby games tend to be geared more towards younger people, particularly children. People my age growing up remember Kirby probably for like the Shattered Crystal game that came out, or just, anyway, the point is that Kirby's just an iconic character. It allows the individual reading the book to imprint on them. King Dedede, not so much, but even then, if you look at him, he is also presented in a very simplistic fashion. He usually just has his mouth, which is kind of a bill, his eyes, and then his hat and his robe. He's kind of like the sort of stereotypical antagonist, which even then, calling him that doesn't really seem fair. King Dedede is a lot like, I would argue, Daffy Duck in the Looney Tunes, whereas Kirby tends to be more Bugs Bunny. Daffy Duck was the guy who was there to mostly just get dumped on and go, rabbit season, fire! And then Elmer Fudd shoots him in the face. But the sort of simplicity of these representations is important because, again, because they're iconic, it allows the reader to kind of imprint themselves upon it. So when Kirby blows fire on King Dedede, you're supposed to laugh and go, ha ha ha, King Dedede, you're so silly. It looks like I'm blowing fire on you, and ha, it's funny because I'm imprinting myself, and I'm sort of riding the wave of it. It's almost a moment when I become Kirby, being all wacky and zany and crazy. And we forget sometimes how important these artistic strategies in terms of character representation are important for conveying information. Again, Hikawa, I'm always forgetting names on these videos, and I apologize, but Hikawa recognizes the audience for what it is. Kids are going to be reading this, younger readers are going to be reading this, and heck, even some weird dude in their 30s are going to be reading this and going, haha, I want to identify with Kirby on some level, because he's the hero of the story. Even if he's the bumbling buffoon who's constantly getting in everybody's way, the minimalist style allows us to kind of imprint ourselves to become that character and ride the energy of the story itself. Now, I've talked about panel layouts, I've talked about the iconography of the artwork itself, but something else that's really important to talk about as well is the way that this book conveys energy. Now, part of it is, again, like I pointed with the panel layouts, the way you alternate between like these really big horizontals and really big vertical panels, and then sometimes these smaller panels as well. It creates back and forth energy so that the reader's constantly trying to catch up. But just as much, too, is the subtle line work of this book. If you look at just this panel here, when Kirby is sort of like sucking everything in, the energy of his inhalation is really being conveyed by these diagonal lines right here. Now, partly, you also have this roar that's taking place, and then you've also got all these tiny little pebbles and rocks and pieces of wood that are being shut up into his mouth. But again, these diagonal lines are a way of demonstrating action without relying on, like with prose, a long description of things going into Kirby's mouth, or in, say, animation or film, just watching these items move. Comics don't have that. They have stilled images and then the gutter moving from panel to panel. So first we saw Kirby beginning this inhalation here, and then moving into this much greater inhalation there. So again, when we're looking at Kirby Manga Mania, one of the things that I would argue is really well done is the way that Hikawa continually shows motion in this book. And motion is important. If you're looking at a book like Ikaro, this is going to be a more adult-driven narrative. Or, Lord, if you look at something like Alison Bechdel's latest book, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, you'll observe that there's long passages of the book that are largely her thoughts and her perceptions. There's some panels that are literally just her words. And the reason for that is simple. If you're reading an Alison Bechdel book, it's going to be very cerebral. She wants you to think. Kirby is a video game character, and his superpower is if he inhales somebody, he gains their power. As such, he's going to be able to lift up his house and fly to the castle and crash through the stone walls. Energy is important because it's another rhetorical effort to just sort of create a sense of, wow, this is fun and energetic and exciting and crazy, and I love Kirby so much. It's a little detail, but it's really one that matters. And so looking at that now, and looking at now I've spent 17 minutes talking about this book, holy crap, let's go ahead and just do the final hurrah and then call it a day. All right, so Kirby Manga Mania. I looked at one story, but looking at just one single story, you can see that, formally speaking, there really is a lot going on in this book. I'll admit, narratively speaking, I really didn't enjoy reading Kirby that much because it was wacky and goofy, even to an extent that I couldn't even really appreciate it that much. Honestly, it may just be that the books that I tend to read tend to be very kind of dark and gloomy, or else they tend to be more intellectually driven. That's just me. I'm a nerd. At the same time, though, I love comics, and so this was an interesting opportunity to read a book that I never would have picked up if I had ever even known that the book existed in the first place. And I was charmed to discover that Kirby Manga Mania was actually a pretty formally interesting book. It knows how to use elements like the panel layout. It knows how to use the gutter to create the closure effect that is so important to the very experience of comics itself. It uses iconic artwork to allow the reader to kind of let go of their own ego and imprint themselves upon this wacky, zany character who clearly is just a goof. There's so many wonderful little things going on in this collection. And so even if you have no intention of buying like all 25 volumes of Kirby Manga Mania or just any of the Kirby comics, I think if you like comics, you should at least take a moment to just sort of casually look through this book and see how it's working at a formal level. Because, yeah, like I said, I didn't really particularly enjoy reading this book from a narrative perspective, but I still appreciate it for what it's trying to do formally as a comic itself. And that in itself, to me, is really freaking cool. And with that, yeah, I think I'm going to call it a day. Whew. Did you ever think I would spend this much time talking about a Kirby comic? Like, literally, I finished The Secret to Superhuman Strength by Alison Bechdel, and I somehow found the energy and drive to do Kirby first. Don't worry, it's coming. This book is amazing. So is Fun Home. I promise. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. As always, please like, share, subscribe, all that Claptrap. It lets me know that you like these videos, that you want to see more. It lets YouTube know that you like these videos and kind of throws me onto more of the algorithm so that we can get more viewers, so that maybe I can get, you know, monetization, or maybe more people who are willing to loan me $1. Which reminds me, if you like this channel, if you like my art that I do outside of the channel, please, please, please check out the link tree in the description section below. The Patreon account is literally $1 a month. So if you've got $1 every month that you don't mind parting with, or even just a one-time donation of funds that you think the channel is worth, please follow the link, throw some money my way. I'll be immensely appreciative for it. Now, when it comes to Kirby Manga Mania, this is put out by Viz Comics. Viz Media is the publication company that puts out a lot of manga. So, and this book, I believe, let me look at the copyright. It says copyright 2018, so it's still pretty relatively new. So, if you're interested in reading these comics, check out your local comic book shop. They will probably be carrying it, or they're probably starting to carry more and more manga, because comic shops are beginning to recognize, you know, people like manga for some reason. You know, maybe because it's good and it's comics. Who would have thought? But check your local comic book shop. They may have a copy of it. If not, they can probably place one on order for you. Likewise, again, don't forget, you live in a world with public libraries. So check out your public library. See if they've got a copy of it in their comic section. If they don't, or if they don't even have a comic section, suggest they bring a comic section into being, because comics are great. Like, Mouse is a thing, Fun Home is a thing, Watchmen is a thing, Fun Home is a thing. Did I say Fun Home? I'm going to say it again because it's a great comic. And Kirby Manga Mania is a thing. So, ask them if they've got it in their comic section, and if they don't, just ask for an interlibrary loan form, and they'd be more than happy to help you out. And, as always, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go read some comics.